My name is Ken Gerards and I am a Senior BI Consultant for Kohera. What are we going to see today? First off, Power Query, where we see the discover and combine. Next, we're going to see something about Power Pivot, where we manage our model and where we can start our analysis. And later on, we're going to go to Power View and Power Map, where we can visualize our model. And finally, today we're going to end with our demo, and this is going to be the main part of our presentation. Power Query, this one is the most logical one to start with. Here we can search data and manipulate data. It's an Excel add-in, and if we want to search data, there is an online search capability. If you already know where you can find your data, there are other options to find your data and use your data. Which are the possible data sources? The most commonly used data source is Excel or other databases, but it's also possible to use web page as a source or the Windows Azure Marketplace. In the demo later on, we're going to show you how we use an Excel, a database, and the Windows Azure Marketplace as a data source for our Power Query. We don't only use Power Query to connect to data, we also can manipulate our data. We can clean it, meaning we can remove data that is unnecessary. We can even merge several Power Queries together so we can get one large interesting data set. We can transform the data. So, for example, if you get an Excel that's not in the proper formatting, you can already transform your formatting into a more interesting model. And you can shape your data. For example, data types can be altered and other things. Power Pivot is the core of the Power BI family, because here you manage your data model. The most important thing in your data model is of course the data, but next to the data we have the relationships. And I also teach a course of 2 days about Power Pivot, and relationships is one of the main concepts we talk about because they're really important. The other element that's really important within Power Pivot is DAX. This is the language especially created for Power Pivot models, and it's Excel-like but has much more features. A small example you can see here. You can also use DAX to add KPIs, so you have more visually interesting reports. One of the main improvements in Power Pivot is in-memory analytics. And this is one of the more interesting features in this model, and one of the reasons why you should use DAX to make sure all your calculations are done using the power of in-memory analytics. Once our model is complete, we can think about how we want to visualize it. One of the ways to visualize our model is Power View. Power View is the perfect way to create interactive charts and graphs, so you can have presentation-ready reports. What do we mean by presentation-ready reports? We mean you can actually explore data on the screen itself. If you click somewhere on one of the graphs, the other graphs will follow depending on where you clicked before. So you can already use these reports to explore your data. Another way to explore your data is by using Power Map. Power Map is another add-in and is mainly or only used for geospatial data. We use the 3D Bing Maps, so we need an internet connection, but once we have that, we can create visually stunning charts with stacked bar charts and heat maps. What's interesting about Power Map is that you can create stories. You can visualize data not only in space, but also across time. This way you can tell a story that's more attractive for your audience. What's also interesting and why you should use Power Map is that you might notice trends and outliers that would otherwise be hidden in tables or graphs. And like I said, in the create stories part, you can create scenes to tell your story, and that's very powerful. But let's show you, that's I think the best way. We open Excel and we check that we have all the features that we need. Power View, this map is Power Map. We have Power Query right here and Power Pivot here. Let me first start and tell you how I set up this demo. In Belgium there is a threat that we're gonna have a electricity blackout this winter, and this triggered my curiosity in how electricity is produced in Belgium and on a larger scale how it is produced in the world. So I went and looked for a data set with this information and I found one. So we're gonna use this Excel with information about electricity production. Right here. And this is the information we get. I'm gonna rename it already so it's more logical. Okay. So you see we have a lot of error messages here. But luckily for Power Query this is no problem and we're gonna solve it right away. But first up I'm gonna change the names of the columns because column 1, column 2 and so on is not interesting, and we're gonna use the first row as field name. That's already much better. And then I'm gonna replace the error fields, error values, with an NULL value, because we want to ignore them later on, and NULL is in IT terms a value you can easily ignore. Another thing that's not interesting in our case here are all those zeros, and we're also going to replace the zeros by using replace value with NULL. Next on, we're gonna reformat. No, I'm gonna delete these 3 columns because I've checked the dataset before and I've seen these 3 columns have no data, so we can remove them because they're unnecessary in our analysis. Now, the data is formatted in such a way we're not really able to do something with it later on. So to be able to work with it later on, we are gonna undo the pivoting of the columns so we get a new formatting. This is, if you're familiar with IT, more like a fact table already. Now let's do some more alterations. We're gonna split this column because I want to use the year here to create a date. To extract a year, it's as simple as this, and the column is split in 2. To add a new column, I'm gonna name it date. We can start typing and use Excel-like logic to create this new field. You see, this looks like a date. It's not enough to say it looks like a date, we're also gonna say it is a date. This is important in a later step in our demo, why we create this date field. Now that we have the date field, we can delete those 2 because we don't need them anymore. So we have rename it to value. This. So this we're gonna say is a decimal. We have the date field I think everything's... Oh, why is there an error here? It's text. I was standing on the wrong number, so it seems. Right, much better. So we have country code, series name, series code, a value and a date. I think that's good enough, and we're gonna close and load it to a data model. It's processing the data now, and it's putting it in the Power Pivot model we can use now. So we start Power Pivot and going to manage the model here. Our values are decimals, our dates are dates, but I don't like the formatting, so I'm going to change it to this. The other thing we see here is we have a country code, and I would really prefer to have a country name, so I will have to find the solution for it. And the other thing, in Power Pivot it's always best to work with a date dimension, so I will also need to add a date dimension. There are several ways of doing this. I have the date dimension on my local SQL server, so I'm gonna use this one as a data source to use in my Power Pivot model. Alright, gonna rename it. I'm not interested in all the fields we have here, so I'm just gonna uncheck the fields I'm not interested in. I'm not interested in weeks, not even months, quarters, years I want to keep, and holidays also are not important to me. I'm gonna say finish, and it's added to our model. We can see this when we click here. We see we have a date and we have a production. One important thing to keep in mind if you have a date dimension is you say mark as date table. We check if this is a date. We're also going to change the formatting here. The date here is same, and we're going to link those two. Oh. Try again. Much better. So now there is already a relationship between production and date. This means we don't need this date anymore, and we're going to hide it from the client. Now we need a country code. I know the Excel, I found it on the in one of the data sets of the World Bank. So I'm going to look there and see if they also have a data set with the information about the countries. So we go to the data mart on the Azure platform, get countries, seems to be there, okay, English, and right, now we have a complete list of all the countries. We're going to select this and rename it to countries. Rename it here also to countries. And we're going to filter the data, because again, just like in the date dimension, we don't want to see all the fields. The codes we want to keep, the name, region might be interesting, income, I don't think that's that interesting, so we're going to remove those. Capital city, why not? Latitude and longitude, we don't need them, and we're going to say finish. And close. So now we have 3 data sets from 3 different locations, but we will be able to join them because it's also possible to have a relationship between our electricity production data sets and the countries. So we can hide this one again. So now our simple data set is ready. Our model is ready, and we can start to do something with it. We're going to save it. Use it. Right. Save. We're going create something using Power View. Remove this. Right. We see here the 3 datasets we've used in our data model with all the fields that were visible for the end users. Of course, the most important thing is the value. So if we drag it to our field here, we can start working with it. And I'm going to use a stacked column like this. Enlarge it a little bit. And if we split the stacked column using the sources used for producing electricity, it starts to get more interesting. But what we have here is the total production of electricity in kilowatt hours from 1960 up to 2011. So we have enormous numbers, but they're not that interesting. So maybe it's more interesting to have a evolution over time. So we just add years and we see we have an evolution over time. But like I said in the beginning, the most important thing for me is what's the situation in Belgium. To get this, I want to be able to split the data and only see the information from Belgium. I prefer to have another visualization, so just switch to the bottom and we go to Belgium. Brazil, and here's Belgium. Right. Maybe it's a bit larger so it's more interesting to read. If we check the data now, we notice some interesting things. Coal to produce electricity has always been a part of the history in Belgium, but it's diminishing and almost is gone in 2011. Another more important thing is the nuclear power plants started working in the 1970s and became the most important source for electricity in Belgium. So when we have problems with our nuclear power plants, there might be a problem in the production of electricity in Belgium. Of course, it's possible to compare with other countries, so let's go and have a look what our neighbors are doing. So for example, Germany, if we get there, Germany here. Right, Germany has a bit of a different evolution. They don't have this focus on nuclear power, but they started using other renewable sources for electricity since the 90s. Another comparison maybe, France. France, you see, they're completely the opposite of Germany, and they've chosen to rely almost only on nuclear power. But this isn't that interesting. Well, it's interesting, but it might be easier if we want to compare our data to add a small table here with the countries, just like this, and we sort the production amount from large to small, and then we see the number of kilowatt hours produced by this country for the last 50 years. And then we see United States has been the biggest producer of electricity over time. But what is this saying? I mean, is this really interesting? Maybe it's more interesting if we flip to only nuclear. Still United States. Hydroelectric. Then Canada is the main producer of electricity using hydroelectricity. But again, what is this really saying? Do we want to know the amount of kilowatt hours produced in the last 50 years, or do we want to have a more actual information? So if we only go to 2011, we can click here on this small square, and then we get hydroelectric production of electricity in 2011, and then we see China, Brazil, and Canada are bigger producers than the United States. So that's it for Power View. Let's save again. And let's move on to Power Map. Like we've said in the introduction in the beginning, Power Map is similar to Power View in a way that it's used to visualize our data in the model. Big difference is we only use geospatial data in combination with time, and that's why I started in the beginning with the creation of a date field. The Power Map works like a wizard. So first he starts and asks what is the geography level that you have available. So we have country name, and he immediately notices it by itself that we're talking about countries. You can see this by the blue dots appearing on the map. So this seems to be okay. And then he says, okay, the height, that's going to be our value. Of course, we want to split it up over the categories we've already used. Okay, let me make this more interesting. This. Okay, so now we have, you can see we have bar charts, stacked bar charts. But what's more, we can add the date field and use it as a time part. Now what can we do? Let me show you by zooming into Western Europe. Like this. And maybe use this visualization. If we push play, we see the evolution of electricity production over time and how which source is used to produce this electricity. So immediately we see that nuclear power is the main source of electricity in France in 2011, and that coal is the main source in Germany. But what's even more interesting is the way you can tell a story. Let's say we're not only interested in Western Europe, but we're also interested in what's going on in America. Then we just turn around the map, focus on America, and we can play here and see the same evolution. Okay, no big deal, you might say. You just switched your view. But what's really nice is that you can play the complete tour. So first you have Europe, you zoom out, you move over to America, and there you start over to see the evolution over the last 50 years of the electricity production. That's our demo. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, you can type them now.